Good afternoon. Hey, Adrian.
Hello.
It's been a while. We're back on StreamYard. Due to my hoopla, but we're here. Nice of everybody to join. We're on LinkedIn today and YouTube and Crafting Tech Teams Substack. Steve, Christina, hello. Thanks for joining us live. Let us know if you're still here watching. Today's topic is communication quality, specifically how you communicate, how you collaborate, psychological safety, situations where people who should speak up stay silent, or they self-censor, or worse, if they get silenced, intentionally or unintentionally. Yeah, that's what we're going to discuss today.
Mhm.
How are you, Adrian?
I'm fine. It's all okay. I don't have nothing to complain. Oh, no, I have nothing to complain. That's the difference. Um, but anyway, that's an interesting topic. I forgot what it actually was because it was your topic, but I think it's very common that there is this idea of the alpha person, or sometimes it's a group of persons, but mostly it's one alpha who is not the team lead and is dominating basically decision making processes. It's dominating meetings, those kind of things. And that's I think one part I would like to contribute today. This is what I saw in a lot of mentorings and coachings, where that actually happens. And it was not only bad for the juniors, of course, because it was a little bit like juniors were never actually daring to say something, contributing something to the actual topic, because they thought, okay, I need to have approval of this or that person. And on the other hand, you have, like, in my case, it was the CTO, and staff. Was it staff or I don't know. I think it was a staff engineer, and they had the problems that the teams they were working with were silent in exactly that way. So they tried to find ways how to actually get that better. So how to not remove that alpha person, but how to remove that issue to have that one person who's dominating everything. And I saw that now several times. And the solution was always to integrate better communication ways and really integrate the idea of having dialogues and like a supportive environment, which sometimes sounds a little bit wishy-washy utopia, but it's actually exactly what you need to implement. That's a leadership issue if you don't have that. So because if there is no leadership in or come from some point into the team, then it is very likely that this happens because that is because there are some people very loud and experienced, and most people are very silent. And it's not just the inexperience of people. We shouldn't forget that most people are not used to speak a lot. So it's not about being an introvert or something like that. That adds to it. So there are some statistics like 30 to even sometimes 60% of the participants of surveys are actually leaning towards being introverted. So there is actually a tendency that the chance is very high that most people are silent or don't want to speak up. But in order to actually do something as a team, you should. And that's the point, because otherwise you are, just a team following orders of another team member, which doesn't make sense to me. So you
Mm-hmm.
should contribute, because otherwise the less experienced persons will have problems keeping up and learning something, because they always think I'm not allowed to think here. I'm just waiting for the orders. I'm here
Yeah,
in that meeting to receive something, not to give something. And that is,
exactly.
I think, that's the biggest issue here.
You
You
had
know.
a great dynamic, and I have to point out that not all teams have this dynamic. All teams have this issue in some level. At some point in their life cycle, they will have something along these lines. But each dysfunction is unique to the team. Like, all the high performing teams, I like to say, are kind of the same, and all the struggling teams are unique. Like, everybody is like not doing the obvious stuff due to their own unique situation.
Hmm.
Um, I work with a lot of startups. And we have to sort of scope the conversation. What I like to point out is that, first of all, you need to understand what kind of game you're playing. Are you playing an infinite game? Are you playing a finite game, long-term game? Like, do you want to stay with a company for 20 years, or do you want to stay with a company for 1 year, or do you have no control over how long you're staying with a company? You might not, a lot of engineers, even CTOs that I talk to, they don't make this decision consciously, so they have no exit in mind. Why is this important? Why is this relevant to today's discussion? Well, because um, most startups, they are financially unstable. So oftentimes startups have exoduses, purges, sort of pivots that are rattling manpower or just rattling the resources inside the company, reorganizing them, laying them off, etc. And usually, my experience has been, I think, 80% of the time, layoffs in startups that are financially unstable are being used to sort of weed out expense like troublemakers who are not fit personality wise, who also happen to have a high salary. What does
Mhm.
this mean? It only means that the silent, submissive, mistreated juniors are the only ones staying. So sometimes it's worth analyzing that, hey, am I just a product of such an environment? Right? Like, am I silent because this startup has seen some crap, right? Or am I doing this to myself? Or did I see this done to me at some other company and I've normalized it to cope, and now I came here and I'm expecting it to be normal? These things are complicated, man. Like, people are complicated. But I can tell you, this is very traumatic, and it's possible that the trauma that you experienced wasn't even in your company. It's possible that you've been laid off, or maybe you survived the layoffs, but then the culture that was a result of that created this sort of very defensive attitudes. Like, people were having like survival mechanisms, right? Like, engineers would complain in the engineering meetings, but then when there's like an all hands or a roadmap meeting, they'll be silent, right? And you get this contrast of self censorship, or we communicate by complaining about the people who are not present in the meeting, and then when they are present in the meeting, we expect it to be sort of telephone or taxied up into the other room. So first of all, you need to make a really, really honest check. Is like, is this happening? Is this my doing? Is this a product of the environment that I stepped into? Is this something I'm carrying with me because I stepped out of it and I came to a new company that doesn't need these defense mechanisms, but I still have them, I still live them?
Mhm.
That is usually what I pick up on the most. So just to clarify, people are complicated, and you might be having these triggers and these sensitivities unintentionally, and it's the big life-changing things like layoffs, threatening layoffs, pips, very aggressive career ladders in large organizations that then pave the road for these kinds of behaviors to emerge and to sort of seep in. Um, so that's worth, if you're a leader in such an organization, it's worth having context about like the bigger picture, the root cause of where this is coming from and what this is protecting people from.
Mhm. I think that's the reason why it is so important to make that a cultural thing. So you mentioned it like a all hands meeting, something like that. So now imagine you have two teams, and one team does have actually a quite inclusive thing, and the other team is a little bit struggling,
Mm-hmm.
like more like the alpha person, and everyone else is silent. Now this scenario, now you get everyone together in a meeting, and what happens then, right? So you don't
Mm-hmm.
have a unified idea of how do we actually communicate in this company. So what is the minimum culture requirement, and that is something you should do from top down in order to remove those things very early on. And to be honest, I think that is very rarely even something people care about or have on their screen. So it's a little bit like an unknown topic at all. So
Yeah.
it's a little bit like, oh, it's a team issue. We have team leads. They need to take care of that. But no, it's not the team
Mm-hmm.
leads. The team leads should take care of implementing this culture requirement and
Yeah.
making sure that happens in their teams. That's their responsibility. But it's
Yeah.
not necessarily that it is a culture requirement. Culture requirements come from top down. So
Mm-hmm.
do we want to have an inclusive thing or not?
Mm-hmm.
Or is it just something we write on a wall in the entrance hall? Or is it really lived? And
What
that's
what you sorry.
no, go ahead.
What you mentioned is sometimes you communicate that it's the team leads that should take care of this. Sometimes they do, and they, rather than solving the problem, I've seen them often propagate the problem. Right. So you say, hey, your juniors don't
Hmm.
speak up. When we ask them, they don't speak. Fix it. What does the team lead do? The next meeting, they talk to them privately, and then in the meeting with the juniors present, they speak for them, right? So they didn't solve the problem; they just made sure that the information flowed, but they still don't speak up. And then you have these like meetings before a meeting to agree on what I will say in your stead, and then we
Yeah,
agree
or even more
and
awkward situations where the
fill
team
up
lead is.
fill up your slide in your in your deck in the town hall deck, and then when it's our turn to speak, what do we agree to say? Who's speaking today? Right, and these are symptoms of, I wouldn't say like psychologically unsafe places, but there's definitely a unhomogeneous amount of safety. Like I might feel safe with you because you're on my team, but I might feel unsafe to be like casual with you in presence of somebody else. Especially if we end up complaining a lot about, I don't know, marketing or products, and then there's the CPO coming in, and we're like, let's keep it all. Let's stare at the screen and pretend to be working, right? So there's a lot of that, and of course, this shows differently. Like you and I are millennials. Um, Gen Z and Gen Alpha are probably gonna show different traits about how this is like showing up for them personally and in organizations run by right. Like I was usually working in organizations where I'm as a millennial was one of the younger people in the org, and it was run by somebody who was an older millennial. Like that was my setup. Nowadays, you have Gen Zers running companies where their peers are other Gen Zers, so the age gap is also um, changing, and it creates all kinds of different cultural dynamics, communication dynamics, slang being used, remote only environments where they might speak two different languages, right? Especially if you're not from Europe. If you're from, I mean, especially if you're not from like Western Europe, so you don't agree on English, but maybe you're from the southern part of Europe, or maybe you're from the eastern part of Europe, and there's a mix of your native language and English, or French and English, or if you're from Latin America, there's definitely going to be some code written in Spanish, or some tickets written in Spanish. Like that's normal there, right? So, and and I didn't even cross the border over to Asia, which is has a lot more engineers than we do all combined. To make this more practical, there is that element of, if you need somebody policing, speaking up, that is not a sign of a good culture, right? That maybe you feel that you're the guardian, that you can babysit the meeting.
The moderator.
The
It shouldn't
moderator,
be
yeah.
moderated. Yeah.
Yeah. So a sign of a healthy culture is that a meeting can happen organically without being moderated. So as long as a moderator is there, the moderator fixing the problem is not a good solution to the problem. It's just exposing the issues enough so that the people can work on it. Right? Most organizations that I work with stop at this level. Oh, we got a moderator, we got an agile coach, or we got Dennis here, or we are hiring a new project manager or TPM or something like that. And they will now take care of that, and our communication flows. No, you've just centralized the symptoms of the communications being bad and empowered one person to speak for everybody. Right?
Exactly.
But the
It's the
dysfunctions have
proxy of
not
the
just,
team. So if
it's
that
proxy.
person isn't available, then you
Yeah.
have a problem because
And you
no
go back.
communication is then
Yeah.
possible anymore. And you basically wait. This is a typical Scrum Master syndrome. So Scrum
Kind of.
Masters don't tend to that's what I saw so far. Even though it's probably the original idea is to enable others to do work, but they keep it very, let's say, a short leash in that moment. It's a little bit
It's
like. Go ahead. Just go ahead.
the intention of a Scrum Master is not to be a salaried role. You shouldn't have a Scrum Master as a person. The Scrum Master should be a hat, right? So the Scrum Master as an
Yeah, but
idea
that's
is,
not how it is in reality out there. There's always this person who's a scrum master.
oh yeah, no, but you meant that it's not how it was meant. What I mean is that the way I understood Scrum, the book and the handbook and then the analysis, like the white papers on Scrum before the Agile Manifesto.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
The idea of the Scrum was that one person in the team calls shotgun and says, I'm going to be Scrum Master this week. Right? So it is an expression of the team managing itself.
Mm-hmm.
Right? When you hire a Scrum Master who is not part of the team to force the team to have a Scrum Master, that's a complete dysfunction in my book. Like if I'm seeing that, I'm like, okay, what is happening here? And that's one thing. But I interrupted you. Go ahead.
No, just my point was to clarify that it is not a good idea to have a single entity as a person in the team who is always that person where communication goes through and will be approved. That is exactly what I said in the beginning with the alpha person, just that you cement it into a role. So you even give it more privileges in that moment. So why should you speak up if you actually are not allowed to? So you basically have destroyed, let's say, a multi-dialogue thing in your team because you actually wait for until it's your turn. And you can do that once a week, like this, what have you done, and everyone can or does have a little bit of time to speak up. That's maybe okay, but in a normal environment where you just want to talk about things in a team, it should be a fluent conversation about the goal, and everyone should be, let's say, motivated by themselves to contribute to that one and not be afraid that this contribution might be seen as wrong, negative, or something like that.
Yes. When I come in as coach, I usually tell them I'm not an agile coach. I'm a life coach who has 20 years of engineering experience. And usually when I come in, they ask me, hey, can we improve something about our retro? And usually I tell them, I don't have retros. Retros are a sign that there's something wrong. And you should be doing retrospectives. What you shouldn't be doing is doing bi-weekly scheduled meetings about, that just has a retro booked in advance with a all hands agenda. I do a retro when I see that I want to have nuggets of learning, small and large nuggets of learning every day. And I call a retro if I realize that we haven't learned anything useful, that we haven't found a way to improve our team in the last few days. I will call a retro. And I will call a retro only with the people in whom I have noticed this. So we can discuss, hey, we've been struggling with a few things for the past few days. Let's have a retro. Let's talk about it real quick. The same way that you would call a postmortem, right? So the incident to call a postmortem is there was an incident. The reason to call a retro is I think we're brushing stuff under the rug and we're not learning as fast as we pretend to be, or we're not learning as fast as we need to be in order to stay ahead of our ambitious goal, ambitious roadmap, or whatever, right? And usually I tell people, look, the most retros that I see, instead of being crudely facilitated, people just complaining, and then they have like a popularity context of who was the most charismatic, passionate complainer. I run retros differently. I'm like, okay, what do we want to improve tomorrow? Just pick something at random, and then everybody's silent, and then somebody says something, and then somebody says, okay, who else wants to join with this? And if nobody joins, or if too many people join, I ask, okay, is there anything more useful that we could be doing? Because I just want to figure out what has been annoying people in the past few days that we have evidence of, that is fresh, and that we will immediately take action on tomorrow. And I'm okay championing one person's pain, but if it then has also positive effects on other people, yeah, but let's put it into action. Because retros create this illusion that you will identify the problem and then the solution will immediately solve it. It's like, no, it's possible that a solution that makes it worse, right? So let's not spend too much time analyzing everything, like analyzing 40 issues and then picking one. No, let's just pick one at random and then ask, okay, does anybody have a more pressing concern? Because we will put then the decision of improvement into into our board, our Kanban board, as a thing that is active, and it will have higher priority than whatever product work is going on. But only one thing. only one thing that can actually improve something meaningful that the team is struggling with in the past few days. And that's the best way that I run like these kind of like small retrospective improvement initiatives. That's
Hmm.
one aspect. The other aspect, I don't even know how to start this topic. So I would wholeheartedly recommend Rory Kilmartin's work. He's a psychologist. Um, I've been on quite a few of his courses. So Rory Kilmartin has created this body of knowledge he calls archetypal relationships, which is based on the work from Douglas, Gillette and Moore. I always mix up uh, it's Robert Moore and Douglas Gillette. I usually mix up their names. It's the archetypes, right? The king, the sovereign, magician, warrior, lover, and these dynamics I often use to really communicate that, hey, like you have all of these archetypes in the organization, and the village will always balance itself out. Like the team, the organization, the squads, they will all balance each other out. If you have like a very alpha speaker, as you mentioned, everybody will sort of shy away from them and stay silent in order to balance the imbalance that they're creating in the system. And you have two ways to solve this problem. You can either go all the way to the opposite end of the spectrum, or you can stay centered and you can put pressure on them to also come back to the center. That's it, right? Like those are the only two variants. You can either react to them or respond to them by staying centered, and then that puts pressure on them to say, right? So for example, if you have somebody that yells at you to get an answer, you can stay silent and they will yell more, or you can say, why are you yelling at me? Like, I'm gonna walk out if you're gonna yell at me. Like, so as an example, right? So it's you're either pulling away to balance or you're staying centered to put pressure, right? So that's usually the heuristic that's going on in these meetings, and the difference between escalating interpersonal issues versus actually healing them. I
Yep.
oversimplified, of course. This is an example to oversimplify the dynamic. And there's usually multiple people in the room who are like pulling, and that it can get very complicated. But one thing that stands out to me is that there are, especially those organizations, engineering or product engineering organizations, that are feature factories. Feature factories are set up in such a way that they assign work. So you sort of silence the team's natural ability to pull work. Pulling would be, hey, I have nothing to do. What is a top priority? That's pulling.
Hmm.
Pushing is, hey, new week. When will you be finished? I have new work for you. That's pushing. Pushing is usually done by interrupters, right? So the type of personality, like I'm an interrupter. Pushing is usually done by people who interrupt other people because they're impatient or because it's not going anywhere, right? Now, the issue is that in a feature factory when the engineering team is unhappy, they are incentivizing for interrupters to interrupt communication. Right? So the dysfunction is that they have stopped pulling work, and they are rewarding the interrupters for validating them by giving them work. And it creates a really weird dynamic in meetings because for example, most often when people hire me, the person who hires me, the CTO usually, is also an interrupter, which creates a really interesting dynamic. And recently I had this happen to me, because usually the first month I'm silent. I just shadow, and then I start communicating more. And then if I see that the team is rewarding interrupters, I'm like, damn it, it's gonna be really difficult because they are rewarding me for doing a bad habit. And I'm aware of this, right? But the conscious decision is that unless there's an interrupter on the team won't
Hmm.
speak up when there's a more dominant interrupter in the room. And
Yeah.
that's the core dynamic of the learning path of such an organization. They need to learn how to voice themselves, right? Because another body of knowledge that might be a little bit more like non-sciencey is the book Sociopaths, right? So Sociopaths was this dynamic of like that it described the typical narrative of, if you don't know what you want, you will end up working for somebody who does. That's the dynamic being described, right? So if you don't speak up for yourself and you don't set boundaries, somebody will set boundaries for you. That's the idea of the book. And usually what happens is that if you're a feature factory team that has lost their voice, you'll definitely be run by a sociopath, right? Because you're communicating that you're vulnerable to it, and the alpha dominant speaker in the organization, which is usually either the CEO or somebody in sales, they will take over, right? Because they will think that you need this in order to be functional as an organization, and you do need
Which
it to
leads to micromanagement in the end.
which leads to micromanagement. Yes. So it creates a sticky situation where we need this kind of communication. Like, we need somebody to champion us, but at the same time, we don't want that champion to speak for us, to micromanage us. And that creates like a really, really messy dysfunction, especially if then that organization grows and this person's responsibility is split. Usually this happens with a CTO that goes from tactical to strategic very quickly, or with a product owner who becomes CPO, or you have that sort of single product minded founder in the organization, and then the PO, PM, EM roles split, and you sort of lose the communicational coherence. But the interesting thing is that when I work with interrupters, and again, I said I'm also an interrupter, because my interrupting,
I never noticed that so far.
and you can interrupt me, and I
in the
like
last
that.
5 minutes.
I'm conscious of it, right? Because I have a much lower latency for how long I wait until I jump in, and I need to jump in because that's how I validate myself, to show that I'm listening. Especially if you say something I disagree with. That's usually the typical interrupter dynamic. So when I work with interrupters, the non-interrupters, people who are struggling in the engineering team, they respond well to it, and it's not a good sign. I probably speak too much in that context. But at the same time, the interrupters also speak up that they like it. They like this energy. They just don't like them being the one interrupted, but they don't mind that it's somebody downstream in the hierarchy, right? And you can then slowly see how this setup came to be, like what dominant forces there were in the company to see these things unfold.
We have a comment, by the way, which is not shown.
Yeah, go ahead and read it. We also had some questions.
I have a problem with LinkedIn today. It's not really working.
I got it open. I don't see the comment on LinkedIn.
Not?
No.
Okay, so I can't even read the name, but Dibash, I don't know. I can't read it. The interface is jumping around. He says the silent voices often are a sign of broken feedback loops. That's an interesting aspect of that as well. When you have that kind of situation, when you have that alpha dominant person, let's say, somewhere in the team, it's not only a problem during meetings, it's of course a problem as well in general communication. So you have that asynchronously as well in chat. So go to ask permission to someone else before you, for example, you have an idea, and instead of pushing that into a group chat of the entire team, you push that as an idea, maybe like, could you take a look at it, to that single person who is then saying yes or no. If no, basically it never sees light again, right? That's one of those things. A little bit like a dictatorship in a team sometimes. And I agree to that one. It's a very common issue out there. So you basically destroy the communication loops in general in teams if you don't have that built or baked in and trained and practiced in the culture, or let's say in the daily communication already. So often people think, how can we optimize the idea of a meeting? I don't think that this is a good measurement at all.
No.
It would be way more interesting for me how much communication happens during the day during regular. So is it okay to ask another engineer for help or for feedback just during the day? If that is not possible because everyone is like in a do not
So,
disturb thing or something like that, those kind of things are, for example, a sign of a bad communication anyway. Because if you need
mhm.
to ask for permission to ask something, you have an issue because no one is asking anything anymore. That's one of those issues, I think, regarding that comment.
A lot of times, so what you said is that sometimes it's like broadcast, right? There's this. I have an issue and I will seek permission. What I see a lot
Mm-hmm.
where I step in very early as like a easy learning tool is stop asking yes or no questions. It's like, hey, could we? It's like, hey, what do you think about this? Right. So stop being, what problems do you foresee if we did this? We're going. Could we reprioritize task A and B?
Mm-hmm.
You can communicate instead. We're seeing need to reprioritize A and B. We're leaning towards B. What issues are we not seeing? Who does this impact? Right? And it's a simple change. Like go from can we to what? How? What? Right? And
Mm-hmm.
that's one aspect. The other aspect is stop broadcasting. Stop asking. There's a Slack channel. Hey, could somebody help me? It's like no, no, no. Could somebody help me? It's a yes or no question. Pet peeve. But also, like you didn't ping anybody, right? You can say, hey, EM, could you assign somebody? Could I get some resources, please, for this task? You ping somebody and say, hey, could you help me find, like, could you help me have this conversation rather than could somebody solve my problem?
Mm-hmm.
Because what I see a lot with communication is that when there's communication issues, it's usually masking as I don't trust you, so I won't speak up. I will speak up when you leave the room, and I will speak up to the people I trust. Right? That's the typical psychological safety dynamic. Or it's you have an agenda and I have an agenda, and I will wait for you to stop speaking, and then I will say my agenda, and you're waiting for me to stop speaking, and then you will say your agenda, and then we're talking past each other, and now somebody has to mediate what we're doing,
You could
right? Without
record videos
actually
as
calling
well
it.
and send those video messages via WhatsApp. It would have the same
Yeah,
effect in the end.
yeah.
It's not a
So
dialogue.
it's not a dialogue. It's two people talking about two different topics, right?
Mm-hmm.
So um, that happens a lot, right? And I often, when I'm coaching such a group, I also often call it out. It's like, hey, just to make it clear, you're talking about this and this and this and this. It feels like you're talking past each other. You're talking about this and this and this. You're talking about this and this and this. What did I get wrong? What did I miss? Because it seems you're in agreement, but you're discussing it differently. Right? So usually when this happens, this
Mm-hmm.
disconnect, juniors shut down because they want to talk about it in a certain way, and somebody else wants to talk about it in a certain different way. So they remain silent because, like, they don't understand the protocol of conversation. So what I generally suggest is that rather than finding the answer, like don't democratize a quorum of who's right, because that's silly. You don't want there to be a winner. This is a relationship. This is a team. You don't want there to be a winner. So don't democratize the decision making space. Instead, talk to each other about how to have the conversation. For example, there's a bug coming in, you're the product person, I want you to prioritize it. It's like, we need to prioritize this. It's super urgent.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and if I know you won't prioritize it, I might hide it, and I won't even come and ask you because I know you will say no, and I'll then complain that I know I have to work on it, but I don't have any resources. I'm not allowed to work on it, so I'll make the work invisible. I'll do it under the table. This is a typical dysfunction that happens like in growing organizations where the EM, PM, and team lead and tech lead is like 7 different managers for each engineer, and it's just hell, right? It's just management lingo, telephone hell. What I generally advise in this situation is, hey, you prioritized everything that was visible to you. This was not visible to you. How would you prioritize it? This is a bug that I found. It's a technical issue. You don't have product context. How would you prioritize this in the product context? Like here, after that, and then maybe the product person says 2, and then you can speak up and say, to me, it's a 7 out of 10. To you, it's a 2. To me, it's 7 of like urgency. And then rather than trying to come up with the right answer, you then go in and I help them sort of unravel this as how would you prefer to have this conversation? Like, what should we do when you think it's a 2 and I think it's a 7 and it's driving me crazy? And I brought it to you because I think it needs more attention than you think it does. So how should we have this conversation? If you're wrong, this is a ticking time bomb. And if I don't work on it, we will have issues next week because we will have lower roadmap capacity. If I'm wrong, we will invest 4 hours into something that was benign. How should we manage this risk? Is it your decision? Is it my decision? Right? Because then you talk about boundaries. Then you're like, I think this falls into my domain, but not to the degree that it derails your entire project. Agreed? Right? And then you sort of start setting boundaries. And some people ask, right? Give options, then ask. Some people prefer just giving the option to create options to the other person. Then again, it's a personality thing about how you approach this. I would generally lean into make a decision. This is the decision I'm making, unless you chime in, right? Like, this is what I'm going to do unless you challenge me. And maybe I communicated at that or before that. So again, it's different personalities handle these situations differently. But ultimately, my suggestion is always, rather than trying to get the correct answer, learn how to have the conversation first with that other person, especially if it's a long-term relationship with the company, long-term relationship with that product person or with that business person or with the customer.
These kind of conversations happen rarely. You just mentioned that with the customer as well. So if you have a very close customer relationship and you have never talked about what actually happens, what you do there, how you work on these kind of problems, what an issue actually mean, for example, for the tech teams working on that, those kind of things should be talked about. So that's working on the relationship, not in the relationship.
Yes, that's a very good point.
And that is like build a framework. So you always should have a framework, but you shouldn't take one pre-existing. You should build it in the context you are in, because first of all, you bring 2 contexts together, at least. So you have maybe one dev, another dev, a client and a team, something like that. You need to merge those contexts and make it one. And that is the actual challenge here, because it's not only a challenge, it's a hurdle that you have that on both sides, that no one actually wants to overcome that hurdle, which is the reason why often communication stays the same. It stays this alpha thing. It stays like, hey, we it is okay. We do the pushing thing instead the pulling thing. All those kind of things happen because you never have talked about that. So if you would have, so we have the topic about juniors today. So how would we involve juniors into that? It's about to actually create that context, that space where speaking up as a person is normal. When you see things, or I have new ideas how we could approach that, maybe no one is seeing that because they have tunnel vision or develop tunnel vision. So I speak up and they may say, no, it's actually not a good thing. I would be against it. Or sometimes they say, it's actually a good idea. Let's talk about that in detail. Those kind of things should happen. So you shouldn't be afraid of the outcome of hearing a yes or a no. And that is what you need to implement. And that is actually a framework you need to develop for yourself. and you need to integrate and it's like you shouldn't do that. Like, you are the team lead, you are creating the framework. It is something, as you said, let's discuss as a team, as a context, how we can do that. And you
Yeah.
will be, let's say, you will be surprised how many different aspects there actually are as a team lead, which means that
Hmm.
you as a team lead, you have only just your context and you think you understand the others. And as soon as the others tell you something about it, you will be surprised how much you haven't understood. And that
Hmm.
should be a sign that it is not the idea of this industrial age leader type of person who is actually a manager, is managing top down and everything is good and replaceable. That is not how things work. Real leadership in that moment is to step a little bit back. It's not the servant leader. I don't like the idea of a servant leader because that's totally wrong. That's not leadership. But being like the person who is enabling others to speak up, who is not dominating the conversation at all, not incentivizing that you interrupt others, is actually leading so that everyone can contribute to such a framework, and not
Hmm.
only in that meeting when you talk about it, but in general. That people say, hey, we have agreed on something, but after 3 weeks, I just realized that it doesn't work for me. Can we talk about that? Those
Yes.
kind of things should be possible as well. It
Yeah.
shouldn't be cemented somewhere. We don't engrave stones here, right?
For a lot of juniors, the first thing that they have to struggle with is to communicate to a stakeholder that they're going to be late on delivery. Um,
Mhm.
and like, looking at it backwards, the thing that most people don't do, that don't go through, is they never have a conversation of, hey, in case our project is late, how would you like us to tell you? Like, what is the protocol that you prefer, you the stakeholder, in case there's, somebody gets fired, somebody is sick, we unknown unknowns, maybe known unknowns, maybe we screw up, different contingencies. How would you like to know? What do you consider needs to know, could know, should know? How do you want to communicate this? A lot of
Mhm.
our teams that interface with stakeholders like this never have this conversation. So they never set like communication quality expectations, right? Like set expectations. Another problem that I'm seeing, so this is like the direct approach with the external stakeholder. Then there's another problem with the. I see you, Ben. I see you. I'm going to comment on that in a moment. Um, Another problem is they don't see their external stakeholders. Another problem is often they don't understand who their internal stakeholders are, because a lot of engineering teams that are in feature factories, they're not a team. The word
Mhm.
the team is just being used as like an administrative unit of we are the engineering resource. We are the engineering department,
A
right?
collection of developers.
And it's a collection of developers, 10 people working on 15 different things,
Mhm.
and there isn't a team, right? Like if there's something wrong, there isn't anybody you can talk to because nobody's working on what you're working on. So if you want to talk to somebody, you now first have to take up the responsibility of interrupting some other project so that you can have some buddy time. And oftentimes, the person who you should talk to, your manager, is actually not mentoring you, not coaching you, and they're just overseeing the administrative unit. And if you go and try to talk to them, maybe they're also the person who can fire you, and maybe you don't feel safe talking to them in this manner, right? And maybe you're not allowed to talk to their skip, and then that's how these things can balloon out and grow out of proportion. So one of the things I do with the teams that I'm coaching is it's unique. It's different in every team, and sometimes they figure it out on their own. I pull some strings and influence, and they start figuring it out. Is that I just keep highlighting that, hey, is this a team or is this 10 people working on 10 different things? And then slowly it unravels that, hey, maybe we don't even have teams. Because what's the point of a team? The point of a team is that you're loyal to a small group of people so that there is somebody very close to you. Like, for example, there's an engineering department of 20 people, and we create 5 teams of 4 people.
Mhm.
The point of the team is so that these 4 people take care of each other. They take care of each other more than the other 16 people. That's the point of the team, right? Like, you can assign me any work, I can pull work, we can have 10 tickets, and there might be disagreement of how we tackle them. But at least we then have a team, a group of people, like championing an engineering, a tech lead or equivalent, and championing a product lead or equivalent, or as Ben mentions, like a scrum master or coach who might be hovering across the entire org or floating across multiple teams, like, or a staff engineer. Like nowadays we call that staff engineer, right? And the point is that no, if there's an issue, go talk to your team. Like, solve it within your team, right? Like, your team is a complete village. It embodies all elements necessary to do work. So try to solve it with your team. Seek support with your team first. And if your team is unsupportive, then that's what we need to talk about.
Mhm.
You had an issue. Why did you feel unsafe? Or what made you feel unsafe to bring it to your team? Who did you
Yes.
bring it to instead? Why did you feel safe with that person who was not in your team and not feel safe with the person who you were in the team? Are there now preferences? Like, would you want to work on the relationship with the people you feel unsafe with, or do you want some slack time and we pair you for now with the people who you do feel safe with so that you can recover a little bit,
It is
right?
a
Then
little
just
bit of
have
the idea of the. It is the idea of sub teams as well, which means that, so imagine you
squads.
have
Yeah,
a team.
yeah,
It is squads, so you have the platoon and the squad, so the entire tech org consisting of 5 engineers, right? So you work on a task, or you have 2 or 3 tasks in the team, and you have 2 people working on that, another one on that, and other 2 on that one. So you actually have 2 teams, and one single person fix another thing. Maybe next day that totally shifts, right? So the people shift because there's another set of problems and they're working differently together again. That's a possible thing as well, where you have people actually working together. As you said, when you have 5 developers and 5 tasks and everyone is working on a different task, sometimes asking for help for others, that's not real teamwork. So that is
yeah,
just helping out in a moment,
yeah.
but the other person is not in the context, and you realize that when you ask for help and that person doesn't really understand the context you are in, that is more like helping out or coaching, mentoring in that moment than actually
Yeah.
being on the same task. So being on the same task means you were briefed on the same thing, you were going through the same thing, and you were debriefing on the same thing, the review aspect,
And
the retro
and
aspect.
more important, if something goes wrong, the team will respond together.
Exactly.
Not
And
like
feel
I will solve
responsible together.
and be responsible together. So, because usually what happens is there's a task, because no planning is perfect. The point of the team is so that if there's an issue with prioritization and priorities change, in a few days, the team decides together what to do. Oftentimes I see, once we start this kind of dynamic reteaming, I call it. I think it's inspired by the team topologies work, flow engineering, Dan North especially, right? Where Dan North usually likes using this metaphor of short-lived teams. Just identify the shape of the work that needs to be done, and then create shapes of teams that match the shape of the work, rather than just rigidly creating like units, like it's a jail or a prison. But just big work requires big complex teams. Smaller work requires small nimble teams. And usually the most effective thing is, okay, how do we convert everything into a small nimble team? And then some work requires coordination of multiple teams. And then if you get that down on paper on like a sprint planning, you've won. That's it. Communication quality solved. Because then you have those small issues of sorry, yeah, the small issues of priorities changed. Yeah, that was my commitment, but we can't make it. I went and worked on some other bug fix. When usually when we introduce this reteaming thing and we have these dynamic teams, really strong teams that people are not used to. I see Steve comment. Steve says it's quite common. You're right. The team is just really groups of developers, not all actually working on the same set of features. When that happens, what often happens is if I start introducing reteaming, dynamic reteaming into such a group, somebody might deviate on their loyalties. And then we have like a retro session of, hey, what happened? Oh yeah, like I was alone, then nobody wanted to help me. And I usually call it out and say, well, did you talk to your team about this? Like, you came talking to the engineering manager, to the CTO, to the product. Did you consult your team? No, my team disagreed with me and they wanted to work on something else. guys, that's not okay, right? And then we approach this idea of, look, you probably thought that what you're working on is top priority, and ignoring it would be wrong. They thought that what they want to work on is top priority, and ignoring it would be wrong. This was an amazing opportunity to try to figure out, hey, what should we, the team, do if we disagree? Can the two of you help me knock this out quickly? Because then I can join you sooner. That's usually the typical dynamic I recommend, rather than splitting up attention. Or if you wouldn't work on it, why do I think I should, right? So if it's super important, why aren't you also working on it?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you know something I don't. Maybe I know something you don't. Because if we all had the same information, we will be making the same priorities. Because we're a quite local, like a minimized unit of priorities and responsibilities. So we should be making decisions in a similar fashion, right? If we were briefed the same, if we're debriefed the same, if we're tasked the same, our decision space should be similar. And if it's not, then that means that our assumption stacks are not the same.
Mm-hmm. I actually have a limited time frame today, so I need to actually go. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Do you want to continue, or shall we wrap up?
I think we can wrap up. I just wanted to highlight Ben Kim's comment on Substack. Ben says, I guess that's why we need a strong Scrum Master or coach. Yes, but when you have when you're doing dynamic reteaming, the teams shouldn't be reporting to the Scrum Master. That's a typical dysfunction that I see. The teams start reporting to the Scrum Master. And how I set it up generally is, no, like, what's a team? Okay, who's championing that team? And then also to define who's the internal stakeholder, like who's making product decisions for this team. And then I put that person into the team. And then I say, if you have a problem, don't come to me, don't come to the CTO, and don't go crying to HR. If you have a problem, discuss it with the team. And if you require mediation, the champions, then please speak up for support. Right? So that it incentivizes the teams to internally talk to each other and try to solve issues without being basically babysitted all the time, because maybe that's what they're used to. And the feedback I get is that the first week is super stressful, but then they sort of relax into this, and they start feeling this autonomy of, yeah, like, we're adults, this is a team, I've been empowered with a team. And then they realize the team is not actually tickets. The team is, I'm not accepting meetings if the team is not joining. That's the point. Like, I am creating a boundary for the team about what kind of other information, meeting requests, or tickets are a disruption and which ones are not, because they're stream aligned, right? So that's the big win there. We still have a minute left before we wrap up. I would be glad to give you the last word on today's stream.
Okay, so I think that is a very important topic, because no matter what you do, no matter is it like a mentoring for a staff engineer, mentoring for CTO, a coach for an entire team, or you coach an entire tech organization, plus maybe some stakeholders which are basically closely aligned to those teams.
Yeah.
And that's the issue. That's the point, is that you always start with a communication. People think that you start to solve the technical issues. They think that, hey, let's fix Kubernetes for something like that. That's not what you do there. So the people are supposed to fix the problems hands-on themselves, but you should basically enable them to get back into motion as a team and understand those things. And that is what most coaches and mentors should actually do, is to push the people towards that others are solving, or the mentees and coaches solve the problems themselves. And that is the main thing. And this is, I think, the very core of the idea today, where we said that, hey, let the juniors speak up. That's a symptom when juniors cannot speak up. That's a clear sign that you have a big dysfunction here, that you actually don't have real communication, especially no dialogues, and no responsibility spread across the entire team. Some people feel, most people don't. And that is where we think we should engage as first as coaches or even tech leads. So it must not always be the coach. So a tech lead, that's actually a job of tech leads and CTOs to create those cultures. The reason why coaches are there is very often it doesn't work because we have I had that from I know that from several sessions where people like I cannot get against the other people. It's a little bit like this idea of there are people that are so dominant, I don't even dare to implement a new culture, even though I'm part of the executive C-suite. And that's something you really need to take care of very early on, that these kind of things don't happen. I saw that when CTOs changed. So there was a CTO who was the total micromanager, and then you basically got a CTO who was more like the business person, and suddenly the entire way of communication didn't work anymore. So you shouldn't align the communication to a single type of managing person. That's not leadership. Leadership should be agnostic. It shouldn't be bound to you as a person. That's, I think, one of the mistakes many leaders do, is to try to, I am a good leader, don't replace me, because then you don't have a leader anymore. If you have that, you are not a leader. You're just a dominant managing person in that moment. There's
Thank you for
another
joining.
comment.
There's another comment. I think we wrap up so that you can step out if you want. But I
I
would
need
like
to.
to stay on for 5 more minutes and answer Ben, because I think he had a
Okay.
great question.
Then thank you, everyone. I'm jumping out. I don't press the wrong red button. I promise,
Please
Dennis.
don't press the red button.
I pressed the leave studio button, not the end recording button. We'll never do that again. Goodbye, everyone.
Ciao, Adrian. Ben, hold on. We're not jumping off yet. Ben had a interesting question. Ben says, "I do not hear us talking about the reason why they do not speak up, because they or they can have all the best cultures, but without knowing the reason, then it's useless." I I always like to go back here on Ryan Ripley's advice. Ryan is a more classical agile coach, and it's like analyzing why only allows us to put a number on the dysfunction that's there. Right. So for imagine, I'm going to use a restaurant metaphor because I think we need one for today, Ben and Steve. I see your comment. Um, it's this idea that if we're poisoning people, the reason why is just putting a number of, okay, how poisonous is this chicken that's going out to the customer right now from 0 to 5? That doesn't solve the problem. That just puts a magic number on the dysfunction. Right? So the reason why is only useful if you already have, like, the metric is only useful if you already have a learning initiative and you're using the metric to see if the learning initiative is working. But if you don't have a learning initiative, like, we're trying to improve this, we are aware this is a problem, this is what we're trying to improve. If it's working, this metric will go up. If it's not working, this metric will not change, or it will go down, right? So if you're just trying to put a metric on it as an answer to the question why they do not speak up, you're not solving the problem. You're just putting a magic number on the dysfunction. Right? So when people don't speak up, they don't speak up because they don't feel safe to speak up. You don't need a reason, right? So you don't need a reason for why do they not speak up. Well, they don't speak up because they don't feel safe to. Then you go another level deeper. Why do they not feel safe to speak up? Well, because there needs to be certain elements of nurture in place for you to feel safe. Like, you will by default, not feel safe with people who are not part of your family, of your biological family, right? It has something ingrained that makes you feel safe. And sometimes even with your family members, you have a fight and you don't feel safe to speak up, right? These are then your normal triggers. So we already know why they don't speak up, and they know why they don't feel safe. But now we can, again, use my previous advice about don't ask yes or no questions or even why to analyze. But let's ask, next time this happens, Ben, you asked, I do not hear us talking about the reason why they do not speak up. The reason is unique to them. There is no general advice, right? Usually what I would contrast it here is to give you a framework about how to solve this issue, not analyzing the psychology behind it. The framework that I generally use is, we think you should have spoken to person A. Instead, you went and spoke to person B. So you didn't feel safe to speak to person A, and you did feel safe to speak to person B. What made you feel safe to speak with person B? And they will tell you. They will tell you, I know them better, or person A once told me off that there was this thing that I made a mistake, and they made it public, and they criticized me in public, and I would have preferred if they had done that privately. And then you get all these kinds of answers. And then once you get this feedback, then you create a standard operating procedure, right? So you can make it public. It's like, hey, one of my rules that I follow is praise in public, criticize privately, especially for a large group. And I make mistakes. Sometimes I let something slip and I criticize somebody needlessly in front of a large group, and then usually apologize afterward. Even though it was helpful, it's usually the sting doesn't outweigh the benefit, even if it's for the group. So the point of not speaking up is not the analysis of the reason. The point of us focusing about communication quality is to figure out, well, this kind of environment creates really good communication. Obviously, if they're silent, it lacks that. Why is that thing lacking? Okay, we don't trust them. Cool, but why not? What builds trust? Well, what builds trust is collaborating together on a challenge where there isn't a obvious dominant party, right? Where I don't say, I'm a stakeholder, I won't work on it, you work on it, and I hope you, good luck, guys, right? Collaboration is, okay, same boat, the three of us are working on a project. That builds trust. So if you tell me, why do I talk to this person and not with that person? Well, because we've been through some shit together, and with that person I never get to work with. So now if you expect me to work with them, well, hang on, we need to build something together. So maybe I should sit, you want to sit at my desk? No, then I'll come over to sit at your desk. Will that upset you? Is that okay with you? What else can we do that might create the same conditions, right? And then create that trust. And if trust cannot be created, because maybe there was some prior incident that just doesn't have resolution, doesn't have closure, doesn't have, something got stuck in the weeds. A year ago, somebody yelled about some project because, I don't know, somebody had a sleepless night overtime and they took it out on their team. This happens all the time. I see that. I've been there. I've been on both I've been in both parties. But then we don't point the finger and say, hey, why didn't you speak up? You had the answer. We already know why. They didn't speak up because they didn't feel safe to speak. Right? So we need to go closer and say, you probably didn't speak up because you thought I wouldn't like the answer, right? And then that made it feel unsafe for you. Right? So how can we simplify this? What can I do to really make it simple for you to tell me that we're going to be late on the project? Or what can I do whenever you need to communicate bad news to me? How would we want to have this kind of conversation? Right? So don't try to guess the right answer and try to figure out why. Just in the future, create a framework for, okay, how do we want to have this conversation next time? Not what will be the correct answer next time. The correct level of trust next time is 3.7. No, it's just, okay, next time this happens, if there's an uncomfortable situation, here's how you resolve it quickly. You talk to your team, don't find a solution. Champions, please speak up to one of the coaches, bring them in. If mediation is necessary, escalate to the CTO or their skip. Done. Right? But it's hard to do these things if the only unit of help is hierarchical and it goes up, which is usually in feature factories. There are no boundaries with peers. It's either hyper individuated or we're all one giant team. If I have I have a manager, there's 15 other developers. I have a problem with a dev and I feel that my manager is not on my side. Who do I go talk to? Well, I go complain at lunch with another group of people. Like there's another category of people in there that I trust, and I go complain to them. How does that solve my problem? It doesn't, right? It just makes it worse. The problem is that we didn't organizationally create levers of like pressure release to support these kind of structures, because these get complicated. It's complex. Same thing with like you go to school and somebody has a problem with one particular teacher. Who should they go talk to? That teacher, right? I often see neurodivergent kids have a problem with their math teacher, and they think that the only person they can go talk to is somebody who's also a math expert that isn't this person, because they categorize people, right? Right? When I grew up in school, I didn't know how much and when my history professor was talking to my math professor. I didn't know if they were buddies. Like if I crashed out or had an issue or cried or had a bad grade in history, did that make its rounds to the math teacher? Like, did they know? Like, did they have empathy with me? Did the problems spread? Did the good stuff spread? Did the bad stuff spread? Right? If I'm a gifted math student, does the history teacher know? Can I, is this shared information? Right? So if you categorize and compartmentalize people into only one box, into only one label, and the only outlet is hierarchical and it's going up, then you will get these kinds of communication issues. Right? So that's feature factories, by the way, right? So the feature factory is this equivalent of the school situation, but for adults working in a high profit but also high stress industry. It's my metaphor, but of course you can poke holes into it. It's not a perfect metaphor. Ben says, I agree, good answer. Thank you, Ben. Okay, so Steve is also commenting something. Some of this comes down to silences. More experienced people are used to putting gaps into conversations to give people time and space to talk. Yeah, so I don't do this. I'm a terrible interrupter and I'm aware of it. What I do is that I only notice that I interrupt people after I interrupted them. Like, that's the best I can do right now. But I call it out. It's like, oh, sorry, I interrupted. Because I need their reaction. Right? Because how I was brought up, my family, we were interrupters. Like, we were like having 5 conversations. Like, if you ever watch The Social Network, how in the beginning scene, the protagonist is talking to his girlfriend, and they're just having 7 different conversations at the same time and interrupting each other. Like, that was my household, right? And the way I was brought up is that it was normal for you to interrupt people because it was witty, it was funny, it was very dynamic, and then you had to interrupt them and see their reaction to see if the interruption was welcome or unwelcome, because we talked a lot. We just waffled on a lot, right? So if you didn't interrupt, then they wouldn't speak talking. They wouldn't stop talking, so they don't give you the natural pause, and that trains interrupters. That's one aspect. So the other aspect is, you said, Steve, more experienced people are used to putting gaps into conversation. I wouldn't put it as experience. I would also say more experienced people of a particular category of personality. Yes. What I usually bring to the conversation in coaching is, if you know you're going to talk a lot, just talk last and then use the meeting time box to limit yourself. If you know you're going to talk a lot, split up what you have to say into musts and nice to have, and do the musts early and then shut up and then do the nice to haves if it's still relevant by the end of the meeting. Steve says, yeah, on a normal daily basis, information is normally flowing back from all developers, but stakeholders don't tend to grab the situation fully. Yeah, I agree. Steve says, but different people in teams really need a silence to feel they can contribute. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Usually, the silence thing is interesting. For example, in Rory Kilmartin's work, I can only speak from my experience. I'm sorry if I'm a bit biased, right? I have that more like wolfish, aggressive speaker experience, and I had to sort of calm myself down in conversation a little bit, because like my dynamic, for example, with my partner, she's the polar opposite. She's going to be silent, right? When I'm speaking, she's silent. And how I used to perceive communication was that, again, because of my upbringing, if I was speaking and you were silent, I took that as you're not paying attention. Because if you're not asking me any questions, if you're not chiming in, if you're not responding, I think you're zoned out. Right? That was my perspective. Of course, completely false, but that was my perspective. That's how my brain worked. From her perspective, when she was invested, she was silent, and then she listened so that she could just emotionally absorb what was being communicated, and really not just listen, but also absorb the passion, the emotion behind it, the focus, the eye contact, right? So I often interrupted myself to check in if, hey, are you listening? Like, is this, yes? Are you with me? Like, is this, right? And she would often get annoyed by me interrupting myself to check in what she's doing, because I was pulling, I was like, hey, puck, you asleep? Is this boring? And what I was doing out of love drove her crazy, and what she was doing out of love drove me crazy, right? And usually it's these opposites that then we need to learn of. Oh no, she's just silent because she's paying attention. But I also need to curb my enthusiasm. I can't now use this 2 hours to just passionately. The attention has a buffer, like it's intense, and you can't do it for a very long time. So usually when it happens in meetings is you have something really exciting to say, you say it, you're the dominant speaker, people are silent, and people are silent out of respect. But then if you don't add that silence, Steve, that you mentioned, right, they will become impatient. And the respect will go away because now you're dominating conversation. Interrupters, like myself, we love this. Because we're just looking for the appropriate minute to jump in, and it's like, okay, now the emotional moment has passed, and now we can interrupt, and now we can have a conversation. And it's like, yeah, right? Because it's welcoming, that kind of environment. But if you're not an interrupter, and that's the only signal that the person is giving, it's very difficult. So I would expand what you're saying. Like, some of this comes down to silences. I would say that, Steve, are you somebody who appreciates a silence to speak up, or are you one of those people who had to train yourself to be silent to connect with those people? I'm sensing it's maybe a mix of both, but again, I might be reading too much into it. If you're still here, Steve. The point I'm trying to convey is that there isn't a universal truth. You can't address the group uniformly. If I know Steve needs silence, then if I make eye contact with Steve, I will give him silence. If I know Bob is an interrupter, I will speak. Hey, Bob, what do you think? Right? And because they love that. They love me speaking, and poof, I pass the ball. And they're like, yeah, I think this is great. And, ultimately, the point of you having and running a team is so that you can learn the uniqueness of the personalities, and you can work with their strengths. Like, somebody requiring silence to speak up is not a weakness, it's a strength. But it's annoying. It appears a weakness if what they need is silence and what you give them is passing the ball, right? This also happens with thinking. When you ask me something and I'm thinking, and I'm silent, and I'm thinking, and they start talking about something else, and they think I'm ignoring them. It's like, hey, no, hang on, I'm thinking. Give me a moment. Yeah, Steve says you're trained. Yeah, right. So are you an interrupter like me? Like, you do like talking and then passing the ball, and then what? You were trained that it was easier if you stop talking and just Gave it a moment for somebody to join the conversation. Steve says, I worked with a sales guy that took me out of a sales car, and there were silences, and I filled those silences. And after, he was furious because he put the silences there to get a response from the people we were trying to sell to. Oh wow, that's interesting. That's interesting. Yeah, it also has to do. I have to say, most of my clients that I work with have teams where 40% of the team is neurodivergent. I saw Spence mention this earlier in chat. Sorry, Spence, if I didn't show appreciation for your comment there. I did read it. Where they will pay attention to everything. So there's different mixes. Maybe it might be ADHD. Maybe it might be autism. A mix of Asperger's with other spectrums. And there are people who sometimes they are hurt and they get it. They just don't know what to do. And sometimes it's the other thing, that they would speak up, but they're just not registering social cues, right? Especially in remote environments. It's like, when is my Zoom helps, because Zoom has that sort of raising hand thing, and then, right? But even that can get annoying if you're in a very passive team, because what the passive team needs is silence. But then now we need to have a framework for, okay, like, how do we do silence? How do we do silence in a group setting so that the silence isn't being used by the aggressive speaker? Especially if there's a lot of things going on and we're in a rush and there's more things than we can discuss, right? So what I'm saying is that it doesn't matter, like, there isn't a universal solution. What I'm suggesting is that if you have evidence of this going on in your org or in your team, have a meeting with a small group of people to have the conversation about how to have this conversation. Have a conversation about, hey, when I do this and this and this and this, what would help you speak up? Like, I'm going to experiment with silence today, see what happens. I would appreciate if the interrupters didn't use it, because I'm trying to connect with the people who prefer the silence, right? To just make it, call it out and make it obvious and prepare people. And just don't do it covertly, so that everybody's aware that this is actually a small nugget of learning. This is some small learning opportunity that we're implementing in the next meeting, and then we'll get feedback, and if it doesn't work, we'll stop doing it. But maybe something will rub off, and maybe the dynamic will change, and then you'll do something differently next time. Again, people are complicated. People are super complicated. There's been a lot of bugs. There's been a lot of bugs, a lot of product launches that went south or got saved last minute just because somebody missed an opportunity to communicate at a higher level of quality that then somebody else picked up on. And when they don't pick up on it, it's usually when you don't pick up on opportunities to improve communication quality when issues occur in your org, usually how that manifests is that something important gets pushed away on your calendar, on your roadmap. That's why Adrian and I are prioritizing this so much, because if you got this communication quality down a little bit here, a little bit high level, a little bit low level, a little bit inside the squads, a little bit in between the squads, a little bit for facilitation, a little bit with the staff engineers, a little bit with product. If you just do this a little bit everywhere, just improve the quality of communication so that you kind of start to build an understanding of how do we bring bad news to this person? How do we communicate bad news here? How do we do product reprioritization without them feeling abandoned or slighted? To learn that, and like that's the biggest 10x improvement. We keep saying that 10x engineers has something to do with the keyboard or the engineer's brain, but I've seen 10x organizations, and 10x organizations are 10x because they got the communication right. They ask, okay, but why can't we have this today? Like, what do you need? Rather than saying, when will this be done, and why is it a number I don't like? Right? Okay. This has been a treat. Again, thank you to Adrian, who had to jump off 20 minutes ago. Steve, Ben, Christina, I see you. Spencer, thanks for joining live. We had Francis also chiming in on LinkedIn. Thank you so much. Ravi, Anderson, Aurelian, those of you who were here but were silent, thank you so much for being live with us on the stream. It's quite an honor to see that about 30 plus people showed up for this topic. So that's definitely a sign of confidence, and I appreciate you deciding to spend your time here with me. It's good for me. Also, I appreciate you spending time on this topic in what I hope is you trying to serve your team better, or you trying to improve your relationships with somebody you care about, or with your team, or with your business partners, or with your customers. Thank you. We'll have another stream next Wednesday. We are back on track on normal schedule. So see you then. I'm gonna give you some elevator music now, and I'll catch you next week. Ciao.